My story starts with I was adopted at about 6 months old from an agency in the Cleveland area. My parents, who, let's just say my adopted parents, they were not able to have children because of some health issues that my mother had had. And they wanted a baby or two, because later on they adopted my brother as well. So they waited, I think, a long time, and filled out lots of paperwork and did lots of things to adopt me. And we lived in Hubbard, which is close to Youngstown, Ohio. And my grandfather, who also was ill, he lived with us. And so you kind of add, as you find out later on in your life, the adoption and kind of feeling unwanted or uncared about. But you kind of add that to having a grandparent live with you who was ill and who sexually molested you. Those are kind of hard to put together. And I didn't really understand for a long time what it was that he was doing until just one day it just was weird and I wanted away. And so I ran away from him and I hid in our basement under a desk that my mother and father had in the basement. And I remember them coming home and them calling out my name, and my grandfather was saying that I was being disobedient. And I got in a little bit of trouble. So, but at least I was safe for that night. He got sicker and ended up moving with my other aunt. And so that kind of took the problem away, and he died. I think I was about 10 when he died. And so that kind of eliminated that problem, but it didn't eliminate the stuff going on inside me that, again, I didn't figure out until later when I was a little bit older. I think we know things when we're going through life. We think we know things, and I think probably I feel the same way now. I think I know things that I have no clue about. So with my grandfather out of the picture, that kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off. I think both my parents too. But my mom was always sick. I don't remember a Christmas that she wasn't ill. And my dad was an alcoholic. And so I also don't remember a Christmas that she wasn't crying because he wasn't home. So those are also things that kind of are in your mind when you're trying to deal with things in your life. So with my mom's illness, they finally figured out what it was, and it was cancer. I can't remember how old I was at the time. I know I was in middle school, I believe. And she suffered pretty much constantly for about 7 years. And my dad would take bouts of behaving himself and not drinking during certain periods of time, maybe in intense treatment for her or things like that, but he'd always go back to it. And I did try threats to him to get him to stop. I tried not speaking to him. I tried to just do whatever I wanted, but none of that worked, because basically alcoholism is a disease like any other addiction is. So my mom is getting more and more ill, and through my high school years, of course it got worse and worse, and so she passed away really almost immediately after my graduation. And I didn't realize how badly that affected me until I kind of looked at this relationship that she had with God, and I kept thinking, how could he take a person who professed such faith in him and lived her life for him and put her with an alcoholic and make her so sick all the time, and then take her from me when I needed her. Because what was I left with? An alcoholic dad, and by that time I did have a brother who was kind of rebelling in his own way. So that's basically what I'm left with. And I kind of just shook my fist at God and said, that's it. I don't believe in you. I don't want anything to do with you. And I'm done. So I kind of went about life doing my own thing and doing whatever I wanted, none of which was healthy. I drank a lot, went out with friends a lot, had relationships with men a lot, none of which I'm proud of, and I certainly don't talk a lot about with anybody, including my husband. But I know now what I didn't know at that time was that there was a reason why all these things were happening, and I just had to keep going. So that's what I did. I just kept going. And I met my husband, Larry, when my father lived in another city, and I was trying to go to school, and I was trying to work several jobs, which I still tend to do. And I met Larry, and I thought, I'm going to do this differently. I'm not going to do this the same way that I did it with other people. And I remember both of us deciding that, we were going to wait. So much for that, because we did not, and we got pregnant with Marissa, and we made a decision to get married because we felt that it was the right thing to do. Not a great way to start out a relationship. As Marissa was born and grew and was learning, I knew in my heart that I wanted her life to be different than mine. Not just, I didn't want to be ill for her. I certainly didn't want Larry, which he never had a problem with alcohol, but I didn't want her to have any of the issues that I had growing up. And so I set out to kind of figure things out. But in living life and doing things, getting up in the morning and getting ready for work and taking your child to daycare and going to work, working a whole day, coming home and doing the dinner thing and cleaning up and just doing life, it became mundane, and I couldn't figure out what I was doing and why I was doing it and what my purpose was and what does this whole thing mean and why do people do this? I just couldn't figure it out. And it's interesting to look back, because now that I know certain things, I know that God had people in my life at different points of time to kind of speak into my life and to tell me that he was interested and that he did care and that there was a purpose. And so I think our daughter, Marissa, was about 7 or so at the time when I started thinking these things. And so I sought out different churches in my area and went for a long period of time to a couple different churches, and one was quite big, and it never seemed like the pastor was speaking. It was always someone else, and so I couldn't figure that out, and I just thought, I'll try somewhere else, and I went to church with some people that I worked with, and the messages were really good, and I was learning, and the music was good, and I liked attending, but every time when I would go, I would see the people that I worked with, and they were acting one way at church and entirely another way at the office, and that really bothered me, because I thought, aren't we the same people? Like, why are you one way in this instance and another way in another? And I thought, I don't want to be like that, and I don't want to be around people that are like that. So I told someone that I was close to at the office, and she recommended that I try her church, which turned out to be ABT. And from the minute I came into the sanctuary, I think I knew right away that I needed to stay. And we came each week, and we did come to church, my daughter and I, without my husband for quite a while before he agreed to come. And what I started learning was that there was a purpose for all of this. And even in the adoption, there was a purpose, that we're all adopted as Christ followers. And so mine is even more special because I've been adopted twice, basically. And so, that was just one of the millions of lessons I feel like I learned. Finding a reason for all of the things that have happened to me in my life. So I'm attending church now, and I'm coming almost every week, albeit I was late almost all the time. But there just seemed to be something more that I wanted to learn, something that was missing. And I often talk to people about, I wish I could have written a book, and now I've seen people have written books like that about, so I'm saved, now what, kind of thing. What do you do next? And I remember my mom talking to me about it as a child, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand any of the stuff that she was telling me. I didn't understand, what this whole believing in Jesus or having him in your heart meant. I didn't understand what happens after salvation. I kind of was under the impression that you accept Christ as your Savior, and then that's the end of it. You're good. Everything's good. And so you can do whatever you want to do, which I quickly realized that wasn't true. So I kind of set out from that moment in this time of discovery of who God is and what it means. And he has started to work out. Am I fully perfect? Absolutely not. But he started to work out in my heart some of the things that I've struggled with, like adoption, which I've talked about, but also the abuse, that it came from someone who was sick and that they probably didn't know what they were doing, and helped me forgive a little bit. Also working out the pull that addiction has on a person's life, in my father's life, and not being angry about it, and not being always hurt like it was against me. It was because they can't function without it. And until they get to a certain point, they're not going to be okay. And so all my tactics of not speaking to my dad and not doing things the right way, and maybe even acting out so that if I got in trouble, maybe he would stop doing it, that all of those things were foolish, because the only person that could get him to stop would be him, and thankfully the Lord. But I think my real turnaround was shortly after we started attending church. I remember it was Easter Sunday, and my daughter just walked forward. It wasn't even an altar call. I don't remember it being an altar call anyway. She just walked forward in this church service and went down to the front and prayed with the pastor's wife. And I was like, what is she doing? And I, of course, followed her, because when your daughter goes somewhere, you kind of follow. So I went with her, and that's when I rededicated my life and really started diving in. I could not study the Bible enough. I could not be involved with enough people. And if you had known me before any of this, I wouldn't have talked in front of a group of people for all the money in the world. I would not have led a Bible study, certainly not, or worked in youth ministry for the length of time that I did. So in realizing who Christ is and what he's done for us, and in realizing how all of the things that happen to us in our lives, good and bad, good choices we make, poor choices we make, how all of that kind of works together to tell our story. Through all of those things that happened, I finally realized that God is first and I, Michele McLaughlin, am second.